Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 58. And in today's very exciting episode, yes, we are going back to Iggy Pop, of course, and one of the, if you will, patron saints of this channel. And today we are talking, depending on how you keep score, 1975's or 1977's Kill City, the album that he made with James Williamson. I am very fond of this album. It's fun to be talking about Iggy again. If you don't know, if I think I've said this before, but if you're relatively new to the channel, one of the stated goals of this channel is to eventually review every single record that Iggy Pop ever made, including the Stooges, of course. I've already done the 2 reunion albums, but I will eventually do the classic albums when I muster up the fortitude. But today is a big one, though, and I think this is one of Iggy's masterpieces. I think this is one of his major works, or it's a major minor work, or it's a minor major work, depending all on how you look at it. It could have been the greatest mini album of all time. It could have made a very strong case for the greatest EP of all time. So we will just kind of get straight into things here. One of the things that I really wanted to avoid in this video, there were kind of 2 things with making this video, is I really wanted to avoid 2 particular rabbit holes. Number 1 is going down the rabbit hole of infinite versions and infinite mixes of the songs. So I really wanted to try to sidestep that. And I think I figured out a way, I dare say, how to do it gracefully, but also give you the thorough Rich Talks Records style experience that you bloody well deserve. But also, the other rabbit hole I wanted to avoid is the Iggy Pop post-Stooges sordid Los Angeles stories. Yes, that is one of the first real article I ever read about Iggy, and one of the first interviews would have been March, April, somewhere in there, 1996 issue of Mojo magazine, which I know that I still have, and I was going to attempt to dig out for the purposes of this video. And I thought, yeah, I can do that pretty quickly, pretty easily. And I started looking at the tubs of old magazines that I have, and I very quickly realized this is going to take me like 3 hours to do, because I have a hell of a lot I started saving magazines in like 92, and I still have a lot of them, yes. So they are just, and every couple of years, God bless her, my wife goes, do we really need to keep all of these? And I'm like, someday it will be important, damn it. Someday. When they really need to write the real history of rock and roll, damn it, they're going to come to me. And I'll have the resources. I'll be ready for them, whoever the hell they are. So anyway, but I just looked at these tubs and I just thought, oh, for God's sake, I cannot do this today. So I did not go that far. But that was the retelling of all the stories, and then they interviewed Iggy. Naughty Little Doggy, I don't think was out yet. I think it was like a month-ish, let's say, before it came out. There was a new album in the offing at the time, but I don't think it had actually been released yet. And the interview was really illuminating. I think that was like the first full interview I had ever read with him. And that was the day that I learned, as a 18-year-old, that was the day that I learned that Iggy Pop, along with John Lennon, Frank Zappa, John Lydon, and Dark Horse, but just as good, Jack Grisham of TSOL, are probably the greatest interview subjects in all of rock and roll. And I learned on that day that, my God, nearly every single interview with Iggy Pop is revelatory and deeply fascinating. So the sordid tales of Iggy run amok, post-Stooges, drug degradation, sifting out fact from fiction. I feel like that's some of the most oft-told stuff about him. And along with, say it with me, rolling around on broken glass and covered in peanut butter. 5 points if you knew where I was going. So I'm just not that interested in that stuff. I'm not really interested in Iggy's degradation any more than I am stories of my own. It's just, I think when you, not that mine was anywhere near that severe, but I think when you kind of live through some of that stuff and you live up to a certain point, one of the quotes from Iggy in that '96 interview, "What is entertainingly flamboyant in your 20s, if you live long enough, makes you start to look sort of like a dick." That's I have now lived long enough that, yeah, what was titillating or entertainingly flamboyant, yes, at some point, what are we doing here? So anyway, that's kind of and not with any after the fact finger wagging or phony posturing or moralizing. I don't mean it like that, but at some point we live past these things, and my goodness, isn't that the whole point and purpose? So anyway, other than to say, Iggy Pop was at a low point. There are again a million stories. The weird him getting beaten up by people pretending to be drug dealers, rolling around on the streets of Los Angeles wearing a dress, arrested in fast food restaurants, all of that stuff. Some of the stories may or may not be true. I don't know if, in fact, Iggy Pop waggled his cock in front of the actress who played Ginger on Gilligan's Island. I don't know that. I also don't know if Iggy Pop actually, in fact, wore or owned, at that point, Jim Morrison's leather pants. Highly doubt it, given that I think Jim was, like, a lot taller than Iggy, and I just don't reckon that they would be the same size. I think Jim was a little sturdier. So yeah, there's just a million tales, and there's the comings and goings of Iggy performing with a band with Ray Manzarek, and I don't think that there's audio of any of that. I've never encountered any of that stuff. It's weird given how heavily bootlegged the Stooges are, the latter day Stooges are. But like they were doing like 96 Tears, I think it was, and maybe like Soul Kitchen. It sounded like they were doing like very brief sets. It sounds like not a lot of material was written, not a lot came of that, and then there was I believe so. I tried to find this date. Was a hard date to track down, and I found it on some chat board from whatever year. So it looks like the notorious, and I had put up photos of this in one of my early Iggy videos, the Murder of the Virgin show. You know the one. I don't even need to put up photos. You know what I'm talking about. It looks like that happened at Rodney's English Disco on August the 11th, 1974. Now, from what I understand, there was one more concert with Manzarek, and then Iggy brought James Williamson back into the fold. I don't know who or what the rhythm section was. Would it have been the Sales Brothers? Perhaps, I don't know. But that there was one more show. Manzarek was like, "This is totally ridiculous. I'm out." And that was kind of the dissolution of that. So somewhere in there, post that point, Iggy really, bottoms out with all of his chemical intake and despondency and inability to get any sort of traction in his personal and professional life. And he eventually goes and checks himself into the UCLA NPI, the Neuropsychiatric Institute, where he is diagnosed, I think initially as bipolar, but then as hypomanic by Dr. Murray Zucker, who does some really good interviews in this. Paul Trinka's book. This is at this point, this is the definitive biography. I don't know that there's going to be another one in his lifetime. I think that there could be. I would love it if Jimmy McDonough would take a crack at it, let me tell you. But Paul Trinka's book is very good. As I said before, I felt like I put it down in a couple of my earlier videos, but just to be clear, this is pretty, it's definitive, because it sort of has to be at this point. But one of the big gets in this book was the interviews with Dr. Zucker, and comparing and contrasting Zucker's actual original diagnosis of Iggy, seeing him back in 1974, contrasting that with what his views of Iggy as he had gone on in life. And of particular note, I believe it's Dr. Zucker, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, was a particular fan of the song I Need More. He felt that the lyrics were an extremely adroit statement of Iggy's psychology, and that it could apply to a lot of other people. And I don't know if I said this in my original video of the Soldier album, but it is a song that I quoted at length many times with my therapist. So it actually did serve that purpose. So anyway, but Dr. Zucker, really interesting and deeply insightful. But basically, Iggy went to them and said that, and I think this quote gets used a lot. I want to say it was in Please Kill Me, and I've seen it. I've seen this quote all over the place. But Iggy basically went there and said, "Please help me. I used to be addicted to very heavy drugs, and now I just take pills and slobber, and I'm a mess." And also Iggy had fallen off a couple stages, and apparently in, I guess, the latter days of the Stooges, fell off a 9-foot stage and really had knocked his back out of whack. And that was also one of the reasons why he was drinking and taking so many pills, was to literally numb the physical pain that he was in. So Iggy dries out, and the thing with Iggy that's always really interesting is a similar thing to that of Lou Reed, or that of John Lennon for that matter. They would only go but so far. It is really interesting, as opposed to a Sly Stone who would just sail off into the abyss, or even like a Jim Morrison for that matter, who just would go and go. It's interesting how certain people kind of only get but so far, and then they bounce back. Something in them snaps and they start to rebound. And I always find that really, really interesting. And so basically, Iggy is in contact with James Williamson and gets permission to have weekend leaves. And I've read different accounts that James negotiated that with UCLA. I don't know. That doesn't sound like it makes a ton of sense. But James would pick him up, and he would be in James's care for the weekend. So much is made of the fact that Kill City was recorded while Iggy was on weekend leave or on a day pass from UCLA, from the NPI. But that was also how the album was written as well. And it was, from what I understand, it was written before it was recorded. And as Iggy put it, it was written at James's place, and with James just playing guitar through a pig nose amp. And that was how they wrote the songs. One thing that I couldn't quite nail down in my looking things up for this video, because a lot of this stuff is stuff that I knew back in my 20s, but there is a very good video that was made by some girl a few years ago. I feel like I watched it during the pandemic, but her channel only made 3 or 4 videos. But she did a pretty decent run through, pretty well researched run through of the whole Kill City period and the lead up. Again, sordid stories in Los Angeles. One of the things that I couldn't quite work out. So I had watched her video way back when. I don't even remember when the hell I watched it. Whatever year it came out, I'll link to it. Whatever year it came out, I watched it it had been out for a couple months. So whenever that was, I don't even remember. But she leaned heavily on the Paul Trinka book and on quotes from Please Kill Me. Because, again, there's, as much as this stuff goes down in rock and roll lore, and there's, stuff written in articles, there aren't a ton of definitive accounts. And again, a lot of the stuff is just sort of rock and roll lore, and you don't get too much into specifics and timeline. So one of the things that I couldn't quite work out is there is an article from May of '75 that published by Nick Kent. Now, in the Paul Trinka book, he dates Nick Kent visiting Iggy in LA to October of '74. I don't know if the article just sat for several months. towards the end of the article, Nick Kent references Dave Alexander dying, so that would have been February of 1975, and Iggy makes a comment like, I'll most likely be next. That being said, that could have theoretically just been pulled from 74. He doesn't specifically talk about Dave Alexander. That could just be a pull quote sort of that fits the theme, right? So I don't know if there were two visits, but if there is only one visit from Nick Kent, and that is in fact in October of 74, and Paul Trinka's date is correct, and we have no reason to think that he's wrong, right? And, there would be delays in articles back then, so that's not outrageous to suggest. It's interesting because there's a lot of stray information in that article that contextualizes a lot of things. So one of the things, for instance, one of the pieces of Stooges lore, oh boy, is that Elton John wanted to sign the Stooges to Rocket Records for a prospective fourth album, and then Elton John ran on stage, unbeknownst to Iggy, in a gorilla suit, and Iggy was he on acid he was on something, and he was not expecting somebody in a gorilla suit, and freaked out. And then John Reed, Elton John's manager, apparently had a pretty unsatisfying conversation with Iggy when Iggy was fully on smack. So that was the end of that. But interestingly, as of, let's say, October 74, John Reed is back in the mix, and the sessions that Iggy and James Williamson have had underway are, so if Murder of the Virgin was August of 74, I would have to imagine that this is probably taking place, they probably started in, September, October. But John Reed is still in the mix and still very interested in signing Iggy and or James to Rocket Records and prospectively putting out Kill City. I had seen one-off references to this album as basically just little more than demos specifically for Rocket Records. What is interesting, and that's what I would have seen back in the 90s, what is interesting is as the decades have gone by, you see it more loosely referred to as demos to shop to get them a label. Now, apparently, Seymour Stein heard the rough mixes in 1975. That's where Ben Edmonds comes in. Ben Edmonds from Cream Magazine is financing everything. And Seymour Stein was apparently the person who said, these aren't demos, this is an album. We'll leave that there, and we will come back to that in a few minutes. But basically, Iggy and James apparently wrote the songs very, very quickly. Not outrageous to suggest, given that it's not a huge number of songs. The whole thing is, the whole album is 11 songs. Take out the 3 instrumentals, that's 8. And then take out the 2 existing Stooges songs, and that's 6. So that's the height of my mathematics abilities, right? And given the relative brevity of the songs, that makes a lot of sense. So the recording sessions happen at Jimmy Webb's studio. So, unlikely hero of the Latter-day Stooges is you have Anne Murray's husband who attempted to manage them. You have, maybe not hero, but attempted hero, could have been hero. You have the potential of unlikely helping hand from Elton John, but then you also have Jimmy Webb, who is it his brother or his cousin, I forget now, who had agreed to engineer the sessions. So that's where this is all done at Jimmy Webb's house. Jimmy Webb, great, amazing songwriter. He wrote all the great hits for Glenn Campbell, along with MacArthur Park, and So I've always sort of been fascinated by Jimmy Webb, so this is another thing that makes me like Jimmy Webb even more. As much as I like his songs, I like this about him as well. So Unlikely Fan, Art Garfunkel, attended at least one session and really, really enjoyed what he was hearing, and apparently was a big fan, hanging out during playbacks. And I will say this, between stories like that about him and his acting turn in the great unknown film Bad Timing. If you've never seen Bad Timing, go watch it. It's fascinating. I kind of like Art Garfunkel a whole lot more than I like Paul Simon. He's my favorite. Garfunkel is my favorite of the two. Also, and I might as well throw this out there because it feels ridiculous not to mention it, apparently, part of the original idea of this as well was that John Cale was hopefully maybe going to be involved in the production of it, or that Cale would be involved in getting them a deal somewhere. But that, for whatever reason, fell through. I don't know why. I've never seen any reason given as to why. But Cale was at least somewhat tangentially involved in the early stages of the making of Kill City. The other thing to note by this point in 1974 was not only was Iggy at a kind of a personal low, but by this point, Lou Reed in the famous, in the second famous fight interview, was it the Death Dwarfs interview with Lester Bangs, famously put Iggy down, and former champion Dave Marsh was shit-talking Iggy as well. And surprisingly, Ron Ashton, who already had New Order up and running by this point, Ron made tracks, man, quick. And Ron was putting Iggy down and saying, he was a good singer, but now he's blown his voice out. Like, he doesn't even have his singing voice. Like, it's pretty surprising. And I don't know the date, but somewhere in all of this is apparently when Flo and Eddie made fun of Iggy. So he was definitely having a rough time. Ray Manzarek said some really tatty things about him, and that, basically in effect that he's a loser and he's never going to get it together. So there was a really, really negative aura around Iggy, as much as you did have unlikely figures like Elton John, Jimmy Webb, and Art Garfunkel who appreciated him. He also was getting a fair amount of negative comments about him. So I might as well just get into this very quickly. So, like Raw Power, like the other masterpiece that Iggy and James made, that Iggy and James authored, shall we say, Kill City had a weird staggered release with and then issues with mixing. We've heard that story before, haven't we? So the version that I had for a really long time was this. This is the 1992 CD version that was originally put out on Bomp. I believe I purchased this somewhere in 1997, I'm pretty sure. And this version, I don't know what the availability of this is anymore. And I honestly don't know what the status of Bomp is anymore. I know Greg Shaw passed away a while ago, but I have no idea. But this was very good, and it had very informative liner notes, really interesting photos from the time. So this was a big deal. Now, at this point, the master tapes had gone missing, so they had to master off like the vinyl for this thing. So the mixes were already pretty weird, and I'll be getting into that. But that, I think, really contributed to, how do I put this? And Iggy didn't have a great opinion of this album, of course. He didn't want it released back in the 70s. And that, I think, really contributed to the sort of the downgrading of this album's reputation for a really long time. And then in 2010, they did find the multi-tracks, and James Williamson reissued it. This is the original cover as it came out in 77, and this is the remastered version. that I bought, and this is, you can make an analogy between the two James Williamson mixes, from the original quote-unquote Bowie mix to the Iggy mix in the 90s of Raw Power. You can make that analogy, but that doesn't really hold up too well, I don't think, and I'll get into the specifics of that. The other place where there are different mixes, and I will definitely be getting into this, are the Jesus Loves the Stooges EP, which came out at the end of 1977, also on Bop. And then there is the original mix of the song Kill City on this, the Million in Prizes compilation that came out in 2005. So I will delineate some of that, because I think that it is not insignificant, without, again, getting too far down the rabbit hole or getting too confounding with it, hopefully. One thing I do think that's interesting to note is that even post-mortem, the Stooges' influence on punk kept sort of increasing. And, it was a few years after this period that was when I Got a Right finally came out, and I will explain that as well in a few minutes. So, but the one thing that is interesting in this period of Iggy going into and then coming out of NPI is he was basically being supported by a couple fans who, for some reason, it's always noted that they were gay. I'm not really sure exactly what the relevance of that is, but a couple gay fans who apparently had some money and were at least initially known as the Pop Patrol, and they were the first Iggy Pop fan club. And though Iggy later on, and I think that this is interesting, I guess they changed their name to the Iggy Pop Hardcore Fan Club. So Iggy said that when a couple years after I Got a Right had been put out, when people started referring to hardcore bands, he always wondered if the name of the Hardcore Fan Club also was part of the birthing of the name of this nascent subgenre of punk rock. So I've always found that fascinating, but I also found it fascinating that the Pop Patrol is discussed a little bit in this Nick Kent article. I thought that was an interesting thing to note. The other thing I should also note before I kind of get fully into album talk is, and the gal who did the video about the Kill City period delineates this, so I sort of don't want to go fully into it, but basically Iggy and James, in shopping the album, whether as an album or as demos, apparently started working independently of Ben Edmonds, who had been making inroads and getting success, and Iggy and James went to some entertainment lawyer, and somewhere in there they didn't have access to the multi-tracks anymore, or they didn't have access to the master mixes that James had made. They somehow lost access to that. I don't know, maybe the attorney held on to it. I don't really know. But that is where the disillusion happened, and why this never came out in its time. It seems as if the intention, though, was to make it happen. Ben Edmonds, though, it should be noted, spent apparently his life savings trying to get this record made and released, and then it eventually, of course, came to nothing. In that video, she notes that Iggy and James drifted apart from each other. I think James just was out of the rock and roll world at that point, or the rock and roll lifestyle. I think James probably maxed out, and then his brief tenure as a house producer or house engineer for whatever the recording studio was that made disco records, I think that probably further sealed it for him. But what is interesting to note is by May of '75, Iggy is like into David Bowie world. So it looks as if there was at least some sort of relapse by the middle of '75, and Iggy and Bowie are back, you know, and that was when they recorded the famous version of Turn Blue that Bowie apparently really out of it, just turned into like a white noise static only mix, a full reduction of the original idea of Turn Blue. So I always sort of looked at the recording session for Turn Blue, and I remember reading about that back in the 90s because that was also big, sort of famous rock and roll lore of the Man Who Fell to Earth era Bowie not being like just creating a pure noise mix of an early pass at Turn Blue. But I always look at that as the point of demarcation where Kill City is officially over with. The other thing I should say about the original release of Kill City and why I don't connect it to Raw Power is because the original 1975 mixes, other than 3 examples, and we'll talk about that, have just never been heard. By the time this came out, so Raw Power came out as is. So if you look at the Iggy mix, if you want to be super purist about it and say, oh, the Iggy mix is rewriting history, whatever you want to say. Now, I love aspects of the Iggy mix, especially what he did on Death Trip. I think that's the crowning achievement of Iggy's mix that came out in 97, I think. But this never really had its proper mix because the final version of this that came out in 77 was kind of after the fact construction by James, where, you know, it's almost like I hate to say this, it's a horrible thing to say, but it's almost kind of like a posthumous album, and it treated as a posthumous album because he wasn't really involved in that. And we know how possessive Iggy is of his music. I mean, he's a taskmaster. He's the band leader, you know. So, from what I understand, a lot of the sax overdubs and there was a whole nother round of mixing that happened, and so there never really was a 1975 version to get precious about. And the 1977 mix and overdubs sort of leads the way to this in 2010. And honestly, and I'll expound further, but I really do see this as the realization of this from 77. But the real version would be, if you wanted to get precious about it, would be the original 1975 mixes that Seymour Stein would have heard. So this was an after the fact release, and I think that sort of needs to be noted. Now, what's interesting about James Williamson is a lot of the legend of the Stooges is born from James Williamson because it's because of him that the Metallic KO tapes get released by Skydog in 76, the legendary, incredible, inadvertent masterpiece that is Metallic KO. That's James's baby. And then the Bomp releases are also James's baby. So Iggy puts out The Idiot and Lust for Life, and on the back of that, James goes and finishes Kill City and gets it put out on Bomp. Now, what is interesting is even before, back in 75, I don't think that Iggy and James, but especially Iggy, I don't think that they were necessarily thinking, we're going to make an independently released album. I don't think that was what was on their mind. I think that they wanted to get the album out, and I think that they would have taken an independent release if they could have gotten it. It's an important distinction. But what is interesting is that all of this, in retrospect, leads to Iggy's reappraisal of the album, which starts in the 90s, where he starts retroactively viewing the album as very, very prescient, and he starts talking about the album in the context of hip-hop. And I am going to, one of the larger themes of my videos, again, inadvertent, I had never planned on this, are Kill City, among many other things, is one of the great LA underbelly albums, and along with LA Woman, along with Love Forever Changes, and then as you get into Ice-T's Original Gangster, Ice Cube's Death Certificate, so on and so forth. And there are other albums along the way that you can dot in. You could basically just say the original incarnation of TSOL's entire body of work. You could also say The Germs' GI is another one of those. But this is an important part of that. It's also interesting that this is really, in some ways, the fully realized version of Love's Black Beauty record, which I really like that one. But it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of crossover between those two musical statements and two albums that were sort of somewhat lost to the driftings of time. But Iggy took a lot of pride, and as independent punk rock happened, and as that became indie rock and college rock, Iggy not only looked at this album as being prescient in terms of anticipating thematic concerns on hip-hop records, but also in the actual machinations of getting punk rock albums released. So what the quote, and I really love it because it's such a kind of perfectly succinct quote from Iggy on the reissue, and I'm just going to read it, is, I like what this album has to say. It is rather high concept, and the music is well thought out. It adheres to no particular genre. A lot of people have borrowed its ideas. It's one of the very first independent LPs I know of. I hope you like it. And that's a very boiled down version of what Iggy had started saying, like I said, in the 90s about this album. And I think that it actually is a really prescient, forward-thinking, brilliant album. At its best, it is a prescient, brilliant, forward-thinking album in its own way, as much as any of the three Great Stooges masterpieces. I don't know that I would quite put it on the level. It is not the full realization that all three of the Stooges' perfect masterpieces. I mean, the Stooges, just off of those three albums, have an absolutely perfect body of work. I wouldn't change a hair on any of those albums' heads. That being said, is Kill City the lesser than those? Yes, probably, but I still would say that it is also a masterpiece. And a masterpiece, how do I phrase this? I think that Metallic KO, I love Metallic KO, right? But I think Metallic KO is a masterpiece in context and a masterpiece for what came later, and given what came later. Whereas I think the best of Kill City really stands on its own in a really powerful, commanding way. And Iggy never really made music like that, well, really ever again. So, because by the time he gets into Bowie, and then when he gets into what I have deemed the avant-garde new wave years, he's off on a million other different artistic tangents. So this is a highly specific portrait of a highly specific time, and it's kind of all the more essential as a result of that. Now, I will finally talk about the mixes of the 1977 James Williamson mixes, as opposed to what is on the 2010 version. It's still hard to fully wrap your mind around what James's complete intentions were back in 1977, because of the fact that this was mastered, the CD was mastered off vinyl, and the mud is muddy. What I will say is, at its best, and it's especially in the early tracks on this album, James, it's almost psychedelic. It's almost a modern psychedelic sort of shifting perspective, sense of mixing that I really appreciate. They are weird, idiosyncratic mixes that I really like and really appreciate. That being said, there are some things on here that I will get into as we get into album talk, where the pudding is definitely over-egged, and I think to some of the material's detriment. it would have been interesting if he had carried over some of the more shape-shifting hologram gritty psychedelia vibe into the 2010 version, but I understand why he didn't. I mean, that does make sense to me. But there still is, as much as I think the 2010 version is vastly superior, there is something to this, and this is worth listening to on a good pair of headphones. And I still would recommend that you hear it if you like this album, because there is a little bit of vibe and atmosphere that is lost a little bit. So I would say that, but at the same time, it is a little like, if you've ever seen that weird rough cut of Apocalypse Now as compared to like the whatever the 4K ultimate version, like it's comparable to that. You know, I think ultimately you're gonna look to the 4K full restoration of Apocalypse Now as like the definitive version, but you checking out that weird wobbly rough cut is still pretty amazing in and of itself. So that's what I would say. I don't think that this should be completely buried or lost to time or just thrown away as, oh, these were the misbegotten ravings of some drug-addled people, because there is something very special about all of this. Now, I will also add, I do think that the big thing that is really lost to history, though, are the 75 mixes, and it would be really interesting, and I would still advocate for that coming out in some form or fashion at some point, and I will be talking about all of that. Other than to say very, very, very briefly that before I ever owned the 77 version of Kill City, I happened upon this at Tower Records one day, and this is the Jesus Loves the Stooges EP. I did not know what in the hell this was, but look at that cover of the dead horse, and it reminded me of the Ron Ashton quote of that he felt by the end that the Stooges were a dead horse that had been beaten into dust, as he had put it. But so I snatched this up right away, and it had I didn't recognize any of these songs. So it was Jesus Loves the Stooges, Consolation Prizes, and Johanna. So this is the original little pullout on this CD single. But, and very, very, very brief liner notes, right? But, yes, the 3D glasses, woo. And so you can put these on and look at Iggy. Look at this 1968 photo of Iggy wildly come to life before your very eyes. Oh, and you've never seen a dead horse until you've seen it with these 3D glasses. So the fact that this was in here was all the better for me. I thought that was just really, really, really cool. Now, I think with all of that out of the way, we can finally get into album talk with this fascinating, beautiful masterpiece. So the album begins with a bang. The title track, Kill City, amazing, amazing James Williamson riff. It doesn't get any better. By the way, the period photos in here, both versions of these have different period photos. I think there's maybe only one in common or two in common between the two issues. And the photos of these two men from this time are fascinating and well worth checking out. So I will say, both Iggy and James, but especially Iggy, cut a really, really, really fascinating figure during this time. Anyway, but Kill City, hell of a riff. Incredible riff. That's a James Williamson classic of a riff. And Iggy, it's a lot more restrained. We've got Scott Thurston on latter-day Stooge, Scott Thurston on piano, and future of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and he does a great job. But it really is that sort of post-Exile on Main Street rock and roll sound. One part sort of post-Exile on Main Street, part Goat's Head Soup, but then also definitely some Aladdin Sane in there as well. And that's a hell of a combination. That's a combination. And maybe some Mott the Hoople. That's a combination I can get on board with, let me tell you. And Kill City, amazing riff. And an amazing song. Iggy sounds great. That is a great vocal. And those lyrics. Short, sharp, smart, piercing, heartbreaking, brilliant lyrics. Incisive, tragic, brutal, great lyrics. Sets up the album's theme immediately. And then what's interesting for this great sort of pile driving yet controlled and contained modern, more mature version of the Stooges is you have sort of like a soul chorus going on with James Williamson joining in for the chorus and doing the sort of like commenting on the singer in the sort of classic R&B way. And I think that kind of like the Celeste on Raw Power, that they used on Raw Power, like that on Penetration. Jesus, I couldn't think of the name of the song. Like it's those unexpected touches. It's that sort of elevated, interesting creativity that Iggy and James bring in their songwriting style to rock and roll, and part of what is so interesting about it. I will say, I think a big part of what is keeping them contained is the rhythm section. We have we have Scott Thurston playing bass, but we have Brian Glasscock on drums of the Gods, and no, not the amazing freak out ESP label noise avant-garde visionaries, the Gods, who I will eventually review someday. But I think they were from England. The English version of the Gods, not Gods with an S, not Gods with a Z. Gods with a Z, though, their time is coming, because I love those fucking weirdos. So that will happen. But what's also interesting about Kill City is that it's a little bit of a miniature. These are, I'm gonna say it, these are tough, bitter little haiku lyrics. These songs are succinct, short, sharp. They're miniatures. Again, kind of like the Harry Nilsson video. These are miniatures. It's in and out. It doesn't overstate itself, and but at the same time, it is a rock and roll classic, and as a statement of purpose, as a mission statement, incredible. So, and I think perfectly sets up, the idea of this is what Iggy is doing on Weekend Passes, and when he says the music is well thought out, it is very well thought out. This is a fully realized piece that's in and out in 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Incredible. But then, and like I said, great opener, great statement of purpose. The original 1975 mix of Kill City is on here. I don't know that it's appreciably different across the multiple iterations, but I would say that this is, I guess, let's say, the de facto definitive version. The thing about the 2010 mixes, it is legible, it is high contrast, and everything is very, very well balanced, and that's the word, I think, though, legible. It's a legible production, and it is, you hear all of the elements. It sounds far more fully realized than other iterations, and it is a very, very, very enjoyable listening experience that I think also would probably translate to more listeners more readily. I really do love these mixes. I will say these mixes sounded like a revelation to me at the time, and they have become so definitive to me that I now can appreciate the 77 mixes more as an interesting, fascinating alternate. So anyway, that's Kill City. Great rock and roll songs. James and Iggy, between Raw Power, the pre-Raw Power songs, you know, Sick of You and I Gotta Write, etc. The Raw Power songs, the what would have been the fourth Stooges album, you know, all of those amazing Open Up and Bleed, etc. songs, and then these guys just dripped great rock and roll songs. They couldn't not write great rock and roll songs. Then we get into, and then this is where the album really goes up a level, and where James is after the fact overdubs and things. I'm super good with because we get into Sell Your Love. First of all, that intro is absolutely perfect. God, that's a thing of gorgeous, just a gorgeous thing to behold. The wordless singing, which I think is probably a lot of which is Scott Thurston. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. And then we get into the song. And now, you know, Kill City is the overall mission statement, and now we're lowering the camera down, and now we're getting specifics, okay? Like now, you know, Kill City is there's a million tales in the seamy underbelly of this town, and now, if I dare say, Raymond Carver style, where we're going down into the back alleyways. So, Sell Your Love, tough, brutal, you know, about a young lady of the night, and the saxophone. What's the guy's name? John the Rookie Harden. I don't know who the fuck he is. Oh, incredible saxophone playing. That is some legendary saxophone playing, and oddly prefigures what you have on Sonny Rollins is playing on on Tattoo You, right? It's just it's really kind of perfect. In a weird way, it's the mirror of what Steve McKay does on Funhouse. These guys, not only did they drip great rock and roll songs, they could find really great saxophone players. I don't know how they did it. So, but I also don't know about anything about John Harden. If you know anything about him, let me know in the comments. I'd be truly interested. But the sax lines, oh my God. And that gives you the idea. Like, James knew what he was doing overdubbing this guy. God damn. And what a song. It's so smoky. Even in these mixes, it's so smoky and atmospheric and like late night walks through Chinatown, you know? It's, oh God, like you can see the red lamps, like, you know, in the breeze, like just, oh my God, amazing. And again, tough lyrics. This is before Taxi Driver, right? If Taxi Driver was set in L.A., it would have to be like, just it's that brutal, but weirdly, deeply evocative and haunting and moving. Iggy's vocal performance, and then Scott's. I guess that's Scott's backing vocals. Or is that some of that James? I don't know. James isn't credited as vocals, but it certainly sounds like him. I don't know. But it is just a masterpiece. Sell Your Love is like one of my favorite Iggy songs, honestly. It's incredible. And if we're going along with this theme of portraits of the city, that sets the bar very high. Now, we get into the next song, Beyond the Law, much more restrained version of the Kill City riff, and it sounds a little, almost a little workmanlike, perhaps. And then the song really kicks in, and this is where John Harden's saxophone, I mean, this might be the best thing he does on the record. I mean, this is like, this could just be on that X-Ray Specs album, German for Adolescents. Like, unbelievable rock and roll saxophone playing, and he's multi-tracked himself. This is production-wise, this is some of James's best work. This is fucking amazing. And what a song. First of all, so, and also I will say, the 2010 mix of Iggy's vocal, I far prefer to the 77 mix. Clearly better, I think. But my God, what a vocal performance. Because, and what's so interesting about it is it's not the blowtorch of Raw Power or Funhouse, but the desperate, sad passion of it. Incredible. And talk about lyrics. I mean, Iggy, it really is one of the greatest lyricists. I mean, this is why I consider him a genius. I mean, this song, these lyrics, these are some of the toughest, smartest lyrics. I think as a social statement, as a statement of being, as a statement of living in society, as a statement of, I don't know, what it means to be a rebel, what subculture means, what counterculture means. This is it. I mean, this is the tough, hard, you know, rock underneath underneath any other more genteel voicings of those sorts of sensibilities. Really, really, really smart, really, really brutal, intelligent lyrics, brilliant lyrics that I think are more apt now than ever. I think this song has only aged more brilliantly as it has gone by. Just one of my favorite sets of lyrics anybody has ever written. And this is why he's the man. Like, this is because he can do that, because he can write this stuff. And this is what he's writing, presumably, in James's living room on a weekend pass while he's drying out at the NPI. That's incredible. That's incredible. Really, really, really great lyrics. And then that vocal performance. I mean, he throws everything he has into it. I saw the Stooges perform in 2012. This was now the James Williamson version of the Stooges. Ron was gone, but Mike Watts on bass. They still had Steve McKay. Amazing. That was an incredible show, but they performed Beyond the Law, and it was still as desperate and intense. I mean, Iggy had to physically, obviously, sing it differently, but Iggy still threw himself into it, and I couldn't believe that they were performing it. That was such a beautiful, wonderful surprise that I got to hear the song live, and that they invented it for 20. No, it was 2010. It was, I think, August of 2010 is when I saw them. And my God, that was amazing. And I definitely didn't expect to hear that song that night. So Beyond the Law is another absolute high point. So Sell Your Love, masterpiece. Beyond the Law, masterpiece. Then we get into the next song is I Got Nothing, which of course famously is one of what would have been on the Fourth Stooges album, and famously this is the version that we know and love from Metallic KO. Is this version of I Got Nothing the definitive version of the song? Yeah, probably. I mean, Iggy, the soul of that Iggy puts into it is incredible, and then James's guitar playing, and I mean the whole band's performance, and it really makes you wish. I mean, the lost Fourth Stooges album, what would have been the Fourth Stooges album, is one of the things that drives me the craziest, that didn't get made. That is such a fucking accident of history. It totally drives me nuts. But the thing about I Got Nothing that was so interesting was that it was a shape-shifting, as were some of those final songs. They were kind of these shape-shifting, open, structured pieces, and that was part of what their power was. So as great as that is, no, it's not on here. There are a couple great versions of it on this. This is the set that Cherry Red put out, shows from 73, 74. But the other version, if you really want another version, go with the Heavy Liquid box set and check out the version from, where is it? From Bimbos in January of 74 on the Heavy Liquid box set. That's another just a total motherfucker of a performance. Really, really, really impressive. So, I Got Nothing is a hell of a song. Now, what they do with it here, it's restrained. It's boiled down. They had to turn it into a studio recording, and I get it. And I think they did as reasonably good of a job as they possibly could. It doesn't get to the heights that it did on stage. It doesn't have the manic desperation that it does on stage. And yet, I think that it conveys a lot of that emotion extremely well. And it does so in a produced studio setting. And while I am always, it's never going to top what the Stooges did on stage in 1974 with it, this version is still really beautiful. James does rip out a hell of a solo on it. So it only suffers by comparison. If I only knew this, I would think, oh my God, isn't that amazing, blah, blah, blah. Again, 2010 mix, this is probably what you would want to go with. So, whereas Sell Your Love could kind of go either way. The Sell Your Love, the weird late night dirty psychedelia vibe works really well on the 77 mix of Sell Your Love. So I should just throw that. All right, and then we get into Johanna. Now, Johanna, I knew from this. This I got in '96. This is the Studio Sessions bootleg, and this is the 8-minute Johanna. It's the long intro, I want to say, and this was how I knew the song for a really long time. And this is, well, not a really long time, as we'll get to in a second. I misspoke, but I like this version. I like the kind of ragged, almost, it could have been a Robert Johnson song or something. I like that version very, very much. But then, here on Jesus Loves the Stooges, we have the 75 mix, which I don't know. Okay, I will say, I don't know for an absolute fact that these are the 75 mixes, but it sure sounds like it. It sure matches sonically to what's Kill City on A Million Prizes are. And I'm going to try and find these. It looks like they were put out on some compilation called Original Punks. I don't know what that is. But I am going to say that these are 75 mixes, because it's kind of the only thing that makes sense. There's no sax. It's all tough, terse James Williamson guitar. And Iggy has all the space in the world to emote. And this is the definitive version. Now, what's on here is certainly strong, and they do a great job. Iggy sounds great all the way up at the top of his register. It's an amazing song. These guys dripped amazing songs. Does this top what the Stooges did? In this case, maybe. The only problem, I would say, no disrespect, but Glasscock is not Scott Ashton. Because nobody is. Because only Scott Ashton was Scott Ashton, all right? So there you have it, right? But this is pretty amazing. This mix is really, really cool. But if I can find it, I'm going to link to the 75 mix of Joanna. If you've never heard it, you need to. Now, here's another thing about Joanna that I think is really, really interesting. Iggy once wrote a song about Johanna. And that song was Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell. And this is a direct quote. This chick, Johanna, she destroyed me, man. She just drove me out of my mind. She was the most beautiful. I mean, she'd climb into my bed when I was sleeping and arouse me until I was just about to explode. And then she'd leave me so damn frustrated. I mean, because of her, I just got strung out of my mind. I couldn't even get it up for 2 years afterwards. Well, he wrote a second song where he hates to say it, but he's coming back to her. So that's the third, so in the same way, the first Stooges album is 1969 and the second album is 1970. The third Stooges album has Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell about Johanna. Well, she would have gotten her own song if there had been a fourth album. So I found that in the Nick Kent interview, and I was like, I have to put this in the video. It's just too perfect. So anyway. But this version is great. It's amazing. I think that this is an even more successful studioification, distillation of the Stooges version. And if they were going to have to turn it into a studio version, this would be probably the best way to do it. And the breakdown at the end is very successful. Scott Thurston's piano is really cool, and again, very well thought out. What a great outro to the song, right? And so yeah, and that leads us perfectly into the side ender of Night Theme, which theoretically does have Iggy's vocals on it. I always consider it an instrumental, but it does have "Living in the Night." And then what's the name of the chick? Gaina from the Count Dracula Society. I assume that's the high pitched all the way up there. But that could also just be like a joke. That could be like some sort of sped up instrument or something. But Night Theme is fine. You know, is it absolutely essential? No. But you know, back when I was back in my 20s, driving around late at night, living in the night, my life happened after 10 p.m. back then, certainly after 11 or after midnight. And, it certainly worked driving around in the car late at night. I appreciate it for what it is. And it's a perfect sort of little palate cleanser. So yeah, I appreciate it for what it is. And then we flip the record over. So side 2 opens with Night Theme Reprise. So a minute 4 seconds of basically the same thing. I'll be honest with you, I sort of can't tell if it's just the same take. But then we get into some studio-ification, some quasi-dark noise-making psychedelia briefly, and I'm good with that. And that leads into consolation prizes. A barnstorming rock and roll song. Now, this is where I'm going to get a little down the rabbit hole. This version of Consolation Prizes is overwhelmingly my least favorite. This is where James Williamson really runs away with himself and, again, totally over-eggs the pudding. This is overwhelmingly, I think, if Sell Your Love is maybe the most successful thing he does on here, then Consolation Prizes is perhaps the least successful. So, and part of all of that, part of my criticism of that, is because, again, this is what I knew first. Now, Consolation Prizes, this is how I knew it, right? And this version, I'm going to say the 1975 mix. I'm pretty sure this is out on YouTube. I'm going to link it, and because this is one of those times where I'm ringing the bell. You got to go check this out. It matters. This is the one, everybody. So if you like this, like, Rich is ringing the bell, so, you know. This version of Consolation Prizes, this is what I knew. This is what I knew back as a 19-year-old before I got the full Kill City album. And this is one of my favorite Iggy Pop songs of all time. This is one of my favorite things that he ever did. This is like top 5 for me, easily. And specifically this version. It's James's best riffing. It's the tightest, hardest, best, but also grooving post Keith Richards rocking that James does on this album. It's absolutely magnificent. It's tight, again, tight, dry, in your face. It's perfect. It's perfect. And it's why he's revered, and rightly so. You know, this is why James is the man, you know, and why we all love him. And I say all that because I praise James, but I haven't really talked about Ron that much. I've talked because James just was around in the late 70s and stuff. But I say all that. I'm a Ron guy. Okay, I'm an original Stooges lineup guy. Okay, and I say that, like, I praise this guy to the skies, and that's coming from a Ron person, and I am definitively a Ron guy, and I still praise James to the skies because he is the goods, and riffs and playing like Consolation Prizes are the goddamn proof, all the proof you need. But that vocal from Iggy, this is one of my favorite Iggy Pop vocal performances. I want to stress this. The 77 and 2010 mix use a different vocal performance. I have no fucking idea why. It's a perfectly good, serviceable vocal performance, but this is the best one. This is it. I love this vocal performance. When Iggy sings "Cheap Magazines Won't Let Me Be," and then he ad-libs, "No, they won't," or "No, they don't." that it the the passion, the honesty, the earnestness, the guilelessness, perfect. And then that outro. So I will also say these lyrics: cheap magazines won't let me be. I'm feeling so clean, but they're digging dirt on me. And through the lonely nights, I'm thinking about my sweet consolation prize. Revenge. Iggy is the poet laureate of revenge in rock and roll, because revenge is what is the underbelly of the idiot and lust for life. Revenge is what pulls his muse together in the late 80s and into the early 90s. Revenge is what undermarks a lot of Iggy's best music. Revenge is what is the steel entrapment at the bottom of raw power. Revenge. Iggy, nobody writes about revenge better than Iggy. Revenge and need, desperation. Iggy is the true poet of these things. And consolation prizes talk about sharp, succinct, underbelly portraits. The idea of this guy in the NPI, like thinking of, because even by the time of Lust for Life, he got a little bit of distance, and he could like wink at himself a little bit with like, here comes success, here comes my Chinese rugs. But this is the raw, dark night of the soul of that sentiment, and dreaming of revenge. And then the cold, hard reality of, is it a chick or is it a fix? It's all just consolation prizes. Fuck. And this was at a time, and I've talked about this in my Avenue B video, this was at a time where I wasn't getting what I wanted in life. I could not get what did I really want? I could not get it on any level. I was a very unsatisfied person, and I was unsatisfied in every way. And so what did I do? I went for consolation prizes. And all of my decisions eventually became orientated around finding consolation prizes, finding distractions. And I think that led to me being, spiritually, psychologically, ideologically off balance and unhealthy, which got more exacerbated over time. But it starts here, right? As Iggy put it many years after this, with a cute little monkey on my back, right? I never had drug or alcohol problems, but we all get different monkeys, and we all get into different bags, and I certainly found mine, and I certainly found my distractions and my consolation prizes, and the fact that Iggy summed it all up here in this perfect, brilliant 3-minute rock and roll fucking masterpiece of a song, an absolutely stunning, brilliant, beautiful articulation of a desperate mindset, and what a truly unsatisfied mind and soul looks and sounds like. The truth is in the sound we make. Brilliant. So, yes, this version is cool, and it's awesome. And if you only know this version, yeah, it'll get you there. But this is the one. This is the real blood and guts. And you might hear it, and you might not even hear the differences. It might not even seem that radically wild to you. It's not like the difference between like the electric and the acoustic Blind Willie McTell or something. But if you're listening, if you're attuned to it, this will seize your attention in ways you didn't know it could be seized. But that being said, if you don't want to go click on the link that I'm going to put below, this'll get you there. This'll get you there, though. I want to be clear. But then we get into another masterpiece. Stuff is brutal, man. Stuff is brutal. One song after another. No Sense of Crime. Ooh, that... It's interesting because it's Iggy trying to sort of be comforting, I guess. And again, this is that weird... It's that weird like side 2 of Exile on Main Street. It's this into the Goat's Head Soup vibe. This dark, smoky, after hours, atmospheric, desperate people with few options trying to comfort themselves and find temporary relief in each other's company and in each other's sort of false reassurances. And wow, it is brutal, and what a vocal performance, but also what a musical setting that James Williamson lays down. The guitars, the vocals, everything about it, just beautiful. But really, Iggy's vocal performance. I mean, the lyrics are, and it's a great melody. Maybe, perhaps, it's the single best melody on the entire record. Maybe, I don't know, but my God, the way he sings it, and the control of the voice, and the way he sort of like leans into the grit of his voice. Oh my God, stunning! What a masterpiece of a song. Another one, like, and the intensity of the atmosphere and these lost people, finding each other fleetingly in the night. Heavy stuff, dark stuff. Powerful, really amazing, and it's interesting because there's a version. I'll link to it. When they re-release this, Iggy and James just perform it, acoustic guitar, and Iggy sitting in a room, and it still has that power, because the power, as much as it's in the mix, as much as it's in the instrumentation, as much as it's in the atmosphere in that day at Jimmy Webb's studio, it's also just the power of the song. The song, the brilliance of the song transcends any setting, and that's a testament to its greatness. So, masterpiece. And then that's sort of it for the album. The album kind of really changes shape from here, because we basically have a completely different band, because the Sales Brothers all of a sudden show up as the rhythm section for Lucky Monkeys. And in particular, it's pretty shocking just how different the sound is from No Sense of Crime into Lucky Monkeys. It sounds just like a completely different session. And different people and different sensibilities. What is the same though? Great lyrics, and there's some much needed humor from Iggy, but a great, at its best, wry, deadpan look at the LA rock scene and the sort of the Rodney's English disco scene, and kind of the creatures of the night of LA. And it's another great song that verges into rocking. James's guitars are great. It is a great, cool song. I don't know that I would put it on the level of No Sense of Crime or Consolation Prizes, Beyond the Law, or Sell Your Love. Those are really major works, but Lucky Monkeys is still pretty damn cool, pretty damn good, and certainly kind of rounds out the album in a really interesting way. And the Sales Brothers are, of course, fantastic. So there's no complaints there with the Sales Brothers. And if this whole album had been done with the Sales Brothers, that would have been cool too. But then we get into the last song on the album, 4.5 minutes. So you consider the relative brevity of these songs, and the last song is 4.5 minutes. And it's the Sales Brothers, and Iggy did not write this. I've seen it written two ways, that James co-wrote this with Scott Thurston. I've also seen it Scott Thurston just receive solo credit, and that is the instrumental Master Charge. It's cool. It fleshes out the record. I don't have a problem with it. I don't think it's bad, but it does end the album. It does make the album feel a little, well, demo-ish, especially given the change in the sonic atmosphere from No Sense of Crime into Lucky Monkeys. So the album does drift a little at the end, unfortunately, and Iggy doesn't seem to be involved whatsoever. I don't know if it's a completely 1977 creation. I really don't know. Or maybe it was just some sketch that was then heavily fleshed out. Again, I have absolutely no idea. It sounds perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with it, but it makes the album feel even more episodic than it is. And I wish it just sort of ended with Lucky Monkeys. We were already at 10 tracks. We didn't need one final instrumental. And Night Theme as an album closer, as a side closer, side opener. And then as the, with the weird studio effect going into the beginning of the Consolation Prizes riff. Like, that's cool, and I like that. And the Stooges were experimentalists, which I think people forget sometimes. And that is in line with the aesthetics of James and Iggy, and I'm cool with that. But Master Charge does feel a little... It does feel a little tacked on. It feels like a bonus track. So I've always sort of treated it that way. And technically, yes, it sort of ends the album on a little bit of a what sort of note, but it doesn't detract from the fact that at its best, yes, this is a masterpiece. And Iggy made 2 other masterpieces in 1977, so that is pretty remarkable. Would it have been cool if this came out in 75? Yeah, absolutely. But I also don't know what James added in terms of further overdubs and saxes in 77. And honestly, I wouldn't want to have the unoverdubbed versions of Sell Your Love and No Sense of Crime and Beyond the Law, and even Johanna. So, I think, this is an album outside of time. It's a little like Orson Welles' Mr. Arkadin. There is sort of no fully definitive version of it, but this is as good as it's going to get and as close as you're going to get. And again, this is the version that I think is going to be the most understandable for people and the most approachable. And that's not like a bad thing, right? Not everything has to be the fucking Rorschach test that we peer into. There's nothing wrong with having an album be sonically comprehensible for you. Especially again, given people refer to this as a muddy mix. It's muddy because it's transferred off a vinyl record, a colored vinyl record. So, you can't read too much intentionality into what James did back in 77 with that. So, at any rate, that is Kill City. It's a masterpiece. It's awesome. James eventually rejoins the Iggy story a few years later. And then way down the line, James also comes back into the Iggy story. And we get Ready to Die, which I've done a review on, which I love that album. And and then Iggy goes off on tour with David Bowie and winds up making 2 unbelievable albums. And you could argue kind of invents post-punk before there was barely even punk. So, people talk about the Berlin trilogy. I sort of look at it as 5 albums, because I include, or even 6, because in a weird way I do include Scary Monsters in that, and I include the 2 Iggy albums. They're right in the middle of all of this, and just as important and just as beautiful. So that about wraps things up here. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and this is like the Harry Nilsson video. I'm kind of doing a run for the next little period of time of these sort of single album reviews, and I have a whole list of them, so I'm trying to just kind of knock them all down as I can, and as I have time to, and the ability to focus. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and we picked up a few more subscribers. The march to 300 continues, so tell your friends, and thank you very much to the new subscribers, and Again, I get some really lovely comments, so I very much appreciate that. And so like and subscribe and leave comments on all of the different YouTube things. And I will see you again very soon with another exciting episode. So until then, bye!